Okay, so now we're going to continue and we're going to be talking about the power of choice. And as you can see, I do have a couple of objectives, but I think you will find that they're more than just these objectives as we go along. And at the end, I hope you'll be able to identify them. But first, I'd like to look at the choice. Why choice? It's part of an acronym which comes from the Florida Hospital. And choice, they say, is the first step towards improved health. And that is so very true, as we will see. Choice is a very powerful determinant of health, well-being, and longevity. It impacts our mental health, our physical health, and even our spiritual health. And choice is something that we'll see right along the whole continuum of life, from conception right through till death. Choices we make will have an impact on our health, total health. Most of you, I hope, have heard of the Blue Zone. And Don, no, you haven't heard of the Blue Zone. Okay, Dan Buettner with National Geographic in 2005, I think it was, he wrote the book, The Blue Zones. And basically what he did, he went around the world looking at the people who lived the longest. So he looked at all these centenarians. And Loma Linda was one of those areas where people were living for a long time. And when he looked at the different areas, from that he saw that the Alcanawans reached the age of 100 at the rate 3 times higher than Americans, and they have 20% less rates of heart disease, and they lived approximately 7 years longer. Now, from the Adventist Health Study, we found that Seventh-day Adventists who adhere to the principles of the church, espoused by the church, they actually live 10 years longer than most Americans. So there are different things that come to play. So from that, my next question will be genetics or choice. Is it the choices that these people are making that help them to live this long, or is it the genes? What would you say? Choice. Oh, good for you. Yes, it is indeed the choice. Dr. Bortz from Stanford University says genetics is responsible for 15 to 20% of our health outcomes, but in fact choice determines the rest. And you can see that because if I'm from a family that has heart disease or hypertension, diabetes, and I don't choose to make different choices to my family members, then yes, I can end up with the same diseases. But even if I do end up with the diseases, I can determine to a certain extent the degree to which I get those diseases based on my choices. So, from Buettner's study, he identified 9 power choices. They were diet, exercise, and again, not just any diet, but a plant-based diet, having a purpose in life, spending that downtime. So for the Sardinians, which were one of those groups that were identified as living longest, he found that they had social time after 5 p.m. So this wasn't something haphazard. This was something that was planned, that was part of their everyday life. When you look at the Seventh-day Adventists, they have the Sabbath, and that's also planned and part of their lives. Grape juice, well, in Dan Buettner's study, he didn't say grape juice, he said wine. But from studies that have been done, grape juice, especially that from the Concord grape, gives you all the benefits of the alcohol of the wine without the negative aspects of the alcohol. And the Concord grapes actually have more resveratrol in them. They're the #1 source of resveratrol. So that is very protective. The other thing that he identified was relationships. Being part of a strong community and having family ties and having values that was espoused by all the people that you interacted with. So those were all very healthy choices that he identified. So when we look at the Adventist Health Study, we see that health is delicately balanced on 8 principles. Now, some of you may have heard of New Start, and as I said, I'm using the CREATION acronym that comes out of Florida Hospital, but they basically both speak to the same health principles, those 8 healthy principles. The next thing that we see is, according to Bill Clinton, most the most serious hurt is self-inflicted. Now, whether he said this before he himself got sick or after, I don't know, but the thing is, he was right on. And Dr. Dean Ornish, who's done a lot of studies in how to reverse heart disease and a number of other negative health outcomes, states that of the 2.5 trillion annual healthcare costs, 75% of that $2.5 trillion is related to the burden of chronic diseases. And when we think of chronic diseases, it's those lifestyle diseases which are based on the choices that we make. Another study found that behavioral and lifestyle risk factors account for 40 to 70% of premature deaths. Now, if we had a choice in whether we died early or died later, wouldn't you really want to know what you could do about reversing those choices? And then they also stated that 33% of all cases of acute disability and 66% of all cases of chronic disability are based on those behavioral lifestyle risk factors, which, when it comes back down to it, is all based on choice, the choices we make. Now, one of the founders of Loma Linda had this to say. She said, "Disease is an effort of nature to free the system from conditions that result from a violation of the laws of health." Again, those choices. And in the case of sickness, the cause should be ascertained, unhealthful conditions should be changed, and wrong habits corrected. Now, when you think about that, today we see the choices that people have made, how it impacts their health. But what tends to happen is not that we focus so much on really encouraging people to make those changes, but they go running off to a doctor and they want somebody else to fix them. So they want the pill or the injection or whatever. But I think we're at the stage where we really have to say, okay, instead of just taking a pill, let's look at the choices you've made. Let's look at the cause and then let's fix it. Because given a pill time and time again is not going to reverse that disease process. So this is, in the long run, as Eleanor Roosevelt says, we shape our lives and we shape ourselves. The process never ends until we die. And the choices we make are ultimately our own responsibility. So if we really think in terms of that, don't give the quick fix in a pill, because those don't work. You just have more side effects. Let's try and find out the cause and help people to accept responsibility, and when they do, they can work together with the healthcare providers to help reverse the disease processes. So we look at some of the impact of choice on our health. And the lifestyle choices truly affect our health, well-being, and longevity. So what we eat, what we drink, they're all important. If we look at the top 10 diseases that we have today, we see that it truly is related to the type of foods we're eating. When we look in terms of cardiovascular diseases, 50% of the deaths result from these poor choices that people are making. Cancer, again, a few years ago, the latest studies coming out, up to about 60% of the food choices and the exercise impact our cancer. Obesity, well, that we know is just going off the scales. And that's definitely, again, related back to our choice. The choices we make also impact our mood and our ability to handle stress. And we can see that as we go along, because whatever we put into our bodies is either going to strengthen or weaken our immune system. So that's why when you see in terms of how we handle stress, and the stress impacts also our health outcomes. We look in 2010, we see that more than 1/3 of US adults, or almost 36%, were obese, and that's from the CDC. And look at this. If men who are obese would lose just 10% of their weight, they would have a 20% reduction in terms of getting coronary heart disease. But if they gained just 10% more weight, that puts them at 30% increased risk for a coronary heart disease. So just those little choices, little changes can have a huge impact on our health outcomes. When you look at this map, it just shows you that over a 10-year period, if you look down here, you will see that we look at 1990, you can see there are basically just two criteria. And in the 10-year span, we go up to 2000, and you can see we've had to increase the criteria when we look in terms of overweight and obesity. And by 2010, we've added additional categories just to show the huge increase in obesity. So the choices continue, and we haven't improved. Now, I'd like you to just look at this, because I know Dr. Grober's alluded to how the habits impact the choices. And one of the things you tend to ask yourself is, if people have information, why do they continue to make these wrong choices? Let's see. I don't know how many of you have heard about Heart Attack Grill. You've seen that little clip. It's just fascinating, because here there is a restaurant in Wisconsin somewhere, and they have on their menu, it's literally called Heart Attack Grill. If you're over 300 pounds, you eat free. You go in and they call their burgers a double bypass, triple bypass, quadruple bypass. And the nurses or the servers all dressed skimpily as little nurses, and the manager walks around as a doctor with a lab coat and his stethoscope. Yeah. And people go in and they order these phenomenal burgers. They look just disgusting. They're oozing with fat. The quadruple bypass, which, you know, if you get through, they say it's a huge event and everyone cheers for you. But they boast that everything, their buns are coated in lard, and the quadruple bypass is 4 burgers, and it's held together by thick slices of cheese, and they say almost 1 tomato, but nowhere in the place do they have anything healthy like lettuce or anything else. And people will come in and order these burgers, and they will sit and eat it. And then they boast that the fries, you get free fries, you know, you can get those all-you-can-drink bars. Well, they have all-you-can-eat fries, and they, again, are deep fried in lard. But people go there, and then they ask the manager, well, why do they do that? He says, oh, people are just fed up of hearing about all the healthy things they can do or shouldn't do. And you just have to say, now, you walk into a place like this with a quadruple bypass, it's telling you right up front what the outcomes are going to be, possibly. And then at the end, some people say, oh, I can just feel this gluing my arteries together, but it's worth it. And one of the spokespersons for them, who was over 300 pounds, actually died. I mean, he was huge. But people still continue to make these choices. So it's incredible what we do to ourselves. Again, those habits and those choices, and we look a little bit more as to some of the things that cause us to make some choices. So my question to you, what's the world's most popular drug and America's #1 drug of choice? You got it. So, and it's also the world's most powerful stimulant. The US alone purchases more than 50% of the world's supply of coffee beans, and American drinks more than 100 million cups of coffee daily. So that's 4 out of 5 people are drinking coffee on a daily basis. Coffee, or the caffeine in the coffee, is listed as one of those social drugs. Now, for the most part, when we say people are taking drugs, we are not too happy with that, but there's drugs that we think about as being socially accepted, and caffeine, alcohol, and tobacco falls in those realms, and they do contain pharmacologically active substances. But still, people are taking them, and they're having negative effects on their health. Children, their greatest source of caffeine, chocolate, and your sodas. And I know in my office there's chocolates everywhere, because for the students, in the afternoon they get to eat all the chocolates, all the sweets that they can to keep them awake. But really and truly, when you think of what the caffeine's doing and the sugar's doing, they're going high and they're coming down lower. So to me, I'm one of those who don't necessarily put out the sweets. I will leave the waters and things out there for them to drink and to just let that be their uppers and downers. So when we look at the structure of the tea, coffee, and cola and cocoa, they're all the same. And I was listening to a lecture by Walter Veith, and it was just fascinating what he had to say. Now, we've all heard of phytochemicals. And what are phytochemicals? They're things that are positive or they can be negative. The negative ones are in the plants as a toxic defense. So, for example, if it was the tea plant and the animals were grazing a lot, it would release all these phenolic acids and the theobromide. It'd be high in the tea just to keep the animals from overgrazing. And the same thing, when we drink those substances, if you look, you see that all of these structures are basically the same. So whatever negative effects you find in one, you will find in all. And so whether you're drinking caffeine, cocoa, or tea, it's all going to be the same. These are some of the effects of the caffeine and the theobromide. Increases the fatty acid concentration, increases blood pressure, stomach acid, increases your stress and the adrenaline, noradrenaline response, and it also prolongs the digestion and absorption time. So anything you're eating is going to take longer. So let's look at a little bit at what happens when you ingest a cup of coffee, for example. So you're waking up and you want to be woken up, so you reach for your coffee. Or you're going through your day and you're feeling a little bit low, so you say, oh, I must have a cup of coffee because, you know, it's a stimulant. So what happens? Your body goes into this flight and flight response because that's what the caffeine does. It stimulates you. At the same time, the liver releases glycogen because you need the energy to be able to either fight or to run. Brain receives a signal. There's sugar on board. So then the pancreas kicks in, releases insulin. Insulin takes care of the sugar. So what happens? You're not doing any fighting, you're not flighting anywhere, and you're sitting at your desk. So all of a sudden, you get down. And then you think, oh, I'm feeling so low again. And so you're either going to reach for your Coke or your coffee, whatever. So you're on this little yo-yo all day. So just imagine what that's doing for your body. Next thing we look at is the additives, because we're making these choices and it's all having an impact on our life, on our health. When you think in terms of Nutriseed, people are thinking, okay, I don't want to lose weight, I don't want to gain weight, I'm going to go for the diet drinks. Taking the diet drinks, in fact, the studies are showing people who are taking always those Diet Cokes and things, instead of losing weight, they're gaining weight. And when you look on the FDA website and look at the effects of the Nutriseed, which contains aspartame, there's like about 90 different reactions that people have had just from the aspartame. And they include seizures, headaches, migraine, dizziness, muscle weakness, fatigue, irritability, hearing loss, palpitation, and the list goes on. But yet, for whatever reason, people are only hearing one message, because actually when you go on the FDA website and you look at aspartame, the people who manufacture aspartame have their own research on there, and it's all positive. And then you look at the other side and you start getting a glimpse of what's really happening. But they're allowed to do it. So the thing is, we just have to be discerning. If we want to really use aspartame, you're going to go and grab those research and say, well, see, it says it's okay. But some of the things that we're seeing as we're looking at all these health problems, we need to look a little bit deeper to see exactly what is going on. What are the choices that people are making? And how often have you heard somebody or a doctor, a healthcare provider, asks about, do you use Nutriseed? Do you use Equal? And maybe make the connections. We don't do it. You may get that little form to fill in as soon as you go to your doctor's office and they ask you all these questions, but by the time you go into the doctor, they only have that 15 minutes with you, so they're going to hit the high points. They're not coming down to these lifestyle choices that may be having an impact on our health. The other thing we look at is alcohol. That's promoted as, you know, it's good for the heart, but we know about the French paradox. Now, I lived in France for a while, and I also worked in Switzerland. And every day I would go down for lunch in the clinic where I work. There would always be wine on the table, never water. So I always had to ask for water. And although we're promoting, or not we, some people are promoting alcohol as being beneficial, we have to look at the other side, because we know it affects the natural killer cells. Even small amounts is capable of reducing the immune system's ability to clear virus-infected cells or cells that have undergone neoplastic transformation. We know that women, if they're drinking alcohol, that can also affect the fetus, and they can end up with the fetal alcohol syndrome. And even 2 drinks for a woman increases her risk of breast cancer if she's doing that on a daily basis. So there's a lot of reasons for why we should be looking at how can we help people make better choices. So what motivates choice? I don't know how many of you saw this article in the Times magazine of 2007, and it was really fascinating. Branding is really powerful. It doesn't just happen. You have a whole group of marketers and psychologists working with these marketers to help you make different choices. And the branding was even phenomenal, because Montague did a study in which they blind tested participants in their studies, and they would give them some cola drinks, and they had to say which one they preferred. And it was fascinating, because at the end, people who were faithful Coca-Cola drinkers, some of them may have said they preferred the Pepsi, and vice versa. And when they were told which of the drinks they had chosen, they would say, oh, no, I made a mistake. It wasn't that one I meant to say, it was the other, because they are so loyal to the brand. And then I recently read something where it says that Coke's mission is to have a can of Coke in every single person's hand. So when I read that, I thought, this branding is powerful, because people would even say, oh no, wrong one. I didn't mean to choose Pepsi, it was definitely Coke. They were so loyal to the brand. Now, in this study that, in the article in Time magazine, it was fascinating because they looked at why people made certain choices. So they make choices based on the pain or the pleasure bias. And that's what drives their decision making. So you can see how strong that is. But the other thing we look at is the other factors that influence choice. Now, for some, is the perceived value. And like most people, especially when you see people going into a restaurant and they can get all they can eat of something or the refills. So what typically happens, you walk in, you fill up with your double gulp or whatever it is, and you gulp that down, and then as you're leaving, you see people going back and getting their money's worth. So that's very powerful, one of the powerful influences. The other thing is perceived nutrition. People today are hearing about making healthy choices and healthy foods. Unfortunately, you still have to read a lot before you buy anything, because the marketers are also utilizing those choice words, natural, nature. And when you read the ingredients on that product, you got to go through about 2 inches worth of different names. Some of them you can't even pronounce. And at the very end, they'll say peanuts. I like the one that they've got there for the children. It was natural peanut butter with honey. So I'm always curious when I'm in the stores and I see all these natural things. I need to go and check it out for myself. So I went up once and I looked at this natural peanut butter and honey. Well, the first things that were on there show they threw some peanuts in, and the honey didn't come till way at the end, after all the high fructose syrup and everything else that they'd added to this natural product. And that's what people are focusing on, is that what catches them. even with the kids' cereals, they'll have all these fruits and things. And now the research is showing that some of them don't even contain real fruits. It's all fabricated. So again, those things you have to be aware of. The other thing is socioeconomic status. And I think that's a really powerful one, because I say in every city, every town, there's a great divide. Either it's the railway station, or with us, as you go under the overpass, yeah, there's a huge difference. What you find on the south side in terms of your grocery stores and other healthier choices, you don't find once you get under that overpass. What you do notice is a lot of fast food places and a lot of liquor stores. So there's a huge difference, and for the people in low socioeconomic status, when you think you're working maybe 2 jobs and you're coming home late at night and you're thinking, okay, there is the McDonald's with their 99 cents burger or something else. Are you going to stop at the convenience store where you have very limited and expensive choices, or are you going to stop at the fast food place, get what you think will feed your family of 4 or whoever, because it's cheaper? The other reasons people make choices, they look at the importance. If they're really concerned about their health and nutrition, they're going to be reading and they're going to be making healthier choices. Price also is a great determinant of what we purchase, and also taste, because we will sometimes let taste dictate over what we know to be healthy. And I like this little cartoon because it sums it up. This actually was a lot. I got this cartoon several years ago, before the price of gas went up so high. But as he says, gas may have cost $99, but hey, I got 128 ounces of soda for just 63 cents. And that sometimes is what people do. They'll say, okay, well, it's cheap, so I'll go for that. Now, question to you. To feed a family of 4, based on what you think, is it cheaper to feed a family of 4 at McDonald's or to cook a meal? Yeah, to cook a meal. But the perception, and I was under that impression too for a while, the perception was, you know, you see all these ads for the cheap burgers and things like that. So you could say that's why people are making these poorer choices. And even though you may present information to them, it's going to take a while because they're used to making these choices. Now here we see for 4 people, it's $27.89. Now let's look at slightly better choices. Chicken, potato, and salad for 4, $13.78. And this came from the LA Times last year, I think. One of my colleagues shared this information with me because they know I'm always interested in seeing all these kind of healthy things. And we can even go one better. Pinto beans and rice for 4, and if you take off the meat part of there, it's even a whole lot cheaper. So again, it's helping people to make the right choices, because some people, they are so overwhelmed that they cannot see the forest for the trees. So sometimes we have to just help them to identify that, yes, you may be on a limited budget, but you can make healthier choices for your family. So Jean Najic says it's choice, not chance, that determines your destiny. And the power to affect your future lies within your own hands. It's not the circumstances in which you find yourself. It's the choices you make that will define the person you become. And choice is a very powerful determinant of health. You are invariably the sum of the choices you will make in your life. And those choices are greatly influenced by your habits, good and bad. And at the end of the day, health begins with choice. Scientists and physicians can show you the way, but only individuals can choose which behaviors they will follow. So my recommendation for you is to choose health.